What if some of the NBA's biggest stories weren't exactly what they seemed? For decades, basketball fans have argued over impossible questions, unexplained events, and rumors that refuse to die. In this video, we're diving deep into the greatest mysteries in NBA history. The stories that spark debates, fuel speculation, and continue to fascinate basketball fans around the world. Get ready for shocking twists, unanswered questions, and legends that blur the line between fact and fiction. These are the greatest NBA mysteries that have been solved for good. Dr. J's not the player we once knew. Somebody else has been masquerading as number 6. Those were the words of a coach when asked about one of the greatest mysteries of the NBA at the time. What on earth happened to Julius Erving? The whole world had such high expectations when he made his NBA debut. And in the eyes of the public, he fell incredibly short. Was it simply Julius taking longer than expected to adjust to the NBA, or was it something deeper? To answer that question, we first have to understand how much hype was surrounding this player in the 1976 offseason. That was a year when the ABA was finally combined with the NBA. Julius Erving was a player most responsible for effecting this merger. He created the demand for it. The doctor was up for grabs, and everyone was trying to land the biggest box office player that the basketball world had ever seen. He was essentially sold to the Philadelphia 76ers, who agreed to buy Erving's contract for $3 million. From that moment, the city of Philadelphia celebrated like it was 1967. Long lines formed to buy tickets. Sixers player Caldwell Jones said that he fell on his knees and cried when he heard he was coming. The hype was real, and for good reason. This was easily the greatest player in ABA history. He won 2 championships with the New York Nets, and he won 3 straight MVP awards. In the 1976 ABA playoffs, he was in peak form. He averaged 34.7 points on 53% shooting, 12.6 rebounds, 4.9 assists, 2 blocks, and 1.9 steals per game. That includes making the buzzer-beating shot in Game 1 of the ABA Finals. It was a magnificent performance in which he scored 45 points on 68% shooting, along with pulling down 12 rebounds. That was a player that the Philadelphia 76ers were getting. But all the numbers and accolades simply don't do him justice. What made him the biggest figure in the sport was his all-world abilities. It was everything that made Michael Jordan the most popular sports figure of his era. His extraordinary leaping abilities and the things that he can do under the basket was simply unheard of. This almost turned him into a mythical character. For the vast majority of basketball fans, it was very difficult to watch any of his games. They all heard the stories, but rarely saw it with their own eyes. This was a golden opportunity to showcase his talents to the whole world. People truly didn't know what to expect. It was all up to the imagination, and people were thinking he was going to dominate right away. The Philadelphia 76ers were the favorites to win the title. They simply had too much talent not to win. If you saw their roster, you would have picked them to win as well. They had George McGinnis, who finished in the top 5 in both points and rebounds in 1976. On top of that, he was a team leader in assists. He was truly one of the most talented power forwards in the game. Then there was Doug Collins, who was one of the top shooting guards in the league. He was a very skillful scorer. Many believe he would have been in the Hall of Fame if it weren't for injuries. Then there was a second-year man, World B. Free. He was quickly gaining the reputation of being one of the most talented scorers. That's not to mention all the highly respected players such as Henry Bibby, Steve Mix, Caldwell Jones, Daryl Dawkins, and Joe Bryant. This team was capital L loaded. With a team that was about 10 players deep, it makes sense why the doctor's numbers went down. When he was playing for the New York Nets, they needed him to average nearly 30 points per game to be successful. With the Sixers, he didn't have to dominate the ball. They were going to use a more balanced attack. That explains why he went from averaging 29.3 points per game in his final season in the ABA to 21.6 in his first season in Philadelphia. But as all great players do, they raise their level of play when it matters the most. That's when NBA fans saw more and more flashes of the player who dominated the ABA. He was gaining more confidence with each passing round. In the finals, he did everything he could to bring a title to the city of brotherly love. For the series, He averaged 30.3 points on 54% shooting, 6.8 rebounds, 5 assists, 2.7 steals, and 1.2 blocks per game. Those were numbers that he would regularly produce in the ABA. He was playing up to his standards. However, they still lost to Bill Walton and the Portland Trail Blazers in 6 games. Although the Sixers were the more talented team on paper, the Blazers were the more cohesive unit, and that was apparent when you saw them play. The Sixers were a different story. This was a team that was often described as the boys of turmoil. The New York Times took it a step further and called them the team of exaggerated egos, inflamed temperaments, discontent, and divisive words. Doug Collins even recognized that his team was full of drama. He mentioned at the start of the 1977-78 season, "I had hoped for a nice, smooth season with no controversy, but it's just not possible with our team. There's no way to keep every guy on our team happy. Coaching this team borders on the impossible." That last part of his statement certainly applies to Coach Gene Shue. To put it bluntly, the players of the team hated him. Gene was also not the biggest Dr. J fan. He went on record saying that he didn't think Erving would make the team better. He needed to go. So they brought in 76ers legend Billy Cunningham. Maybe he would bring that championship experience that this team desperately needed. Maybe he would revolve the offense more around the greatest individual talent in the game and fully unleash him. But the opposite happened. His scoring and rebounding numbers declined for the 1977 season. He didn't even finish in the top 20 in scoring. It wasn't just the underwhelming numbers that frustrated fans. All those high-flying moves that they were anxious to see were nowhere to be found. For example, this is what Sports Illustrated wrote in 1978 about his performances. At the time of the merger, Erving was considered the best and most exciting player in the game. Erving's dazzling talent was underscored by a rare ability to inspire his teammates to levels that they couldn't achieve on their own. But in the NBA, Erving has never done this. Then, the New York Times wrote this: "Although he does not admit it directly, Julius Erving appears to have made a decision not to make the moves of Dr. J permanently and easily accessible to the people who shout and scream and leap from their seats in NBA arenas across the country cheering for the doctor." The narrative was that the doctor had become just plain Julius Erving. This didn't just come from the media. Check out what his former coach from the Virginia Squires said about him. Julius used to take off and soar. I mean really soar. And that's the sad part of seeing him now. The dog can't fly anymore. Then, Sports Illustrated received a very honest observation from an NBA coach when they published a headline in 1979, "Hey, what's up with the dog?" He said, "I don't know if it's the big contract, plain disgust, concerned about his longevity, or just that he's burnt out and can't do it nightly anymore. But Dr. J is not the player we once knew. The electricity isn't there." The truth is that except for a few playoff games in '77 and the All-Star games, the guy has been on vacation for 3 years. Somebody else has been masquerading as number 6. On a consistent basis, Julius has played to about 40% tops of the ability he showed in the ABA. What this coach said was the harsh truth. He was not playing to his ability. This was the greatest individual talent the league had ever seen. He was meant for greater things. He was too good to be playing at an above average level. Despite all the complaints, the Sixers were playing at a high level. They won 55 games in 1978, which was the best record in the Eastern Conference. They also finished first in both points per game and offensive rating. But in the conference finals, they were completely outclassed by the Washington Bullets, the team that won 11 fewer games. For the series, the Doctor averaged 21.5 points on 47% shooting, 9.3 rebounds, and 3.3 assists per game. He wasn't able to duplicate the dominance that he displayed in the 1977 postseason. Then, in the 1978-79 season, the public opinion on Julius Erving was at an all-time low. He didn't receive a single vote for the MVP ballot, and he was snubbed from the All-NBA. This is not how everyone envisioned his career in the NBA would turn out. We can see why the sports world was asking, what happened to Dr. J? We've gone everyone's side except his. The following quotes are what I gathered from Sports Illustrated and the New York Times. Here are some of the things that he said. When George McGinnis and Daryl Dawkins and myself play together, basically their strengths are down low and inside, if there's not enough room for all three of us to be down there. So I find myself playing in the middle part of the court between Doug Collins and Henry Bibby, who are outside, and George and Daryl, who are inside where I can still perform. But as far as expecting me to drive to the hoop with George and Daryl down there, with their men posting up, is not going to happen. I know what my potential is, and I know if it's necessary for me to play 40 to 45 minutes and score 30 to 35 points or 50 points for us to win, and then I can do it. But that's not what's best for our team, and has never been during the year. With this quote, the first main issue was the personnel of the team. There wasn't much room to operate with the front court they had, and there weren't many opportunities for him to dominate the game individually. He was more focused on playing a team-oriented style than reaching a certain threshold of numbers. But that's just one part of the story. Let's move on to another one of his quotes. The situation was created on day one in Philly that I would not play my game. Here I was that very first week, playing tough and going all out, playing my game, where Fred Carter said, "Hey, easy man, you're working too hard." He then said, "Now we've got another offense in here, but there's no direction. The problem is we have no offensive identity. Seattle walks it up, so we walk it up. LA wants to run it and push it, so we do the same and get blown out. We always play the other people's game." With this quote, the next issue started with the players being way too preoccupied with their touches, and he was simply trying to keep the harmony. He knew how important that was if you wanted to win a championship. There was also an issue with the coaches. We all know how bad Gene Shue was for this team, but Billy Cunningham was also having problems trying to figure everything out in his first couple of years. Without having a proper structure, Julius wasn't able to play to the best of his abilities. But the last set of quotes might be the most important to this whole story. He said this when discussing his team in the ABA. "It was fun in the huddles, when all else failed, and Kevin, the coach of the Nets, would say to me, 'It's time to do something,' and you know I would. But I refused to be pressured into forcing myself to take over here. I'm a follower." He also said, "When I was with the Nets, my teammates got out of the way and I used things. It seems now that if I go to use things, because I haven't used them enough, I get hurt. The wear and tear has taken its toll. It's a mental thing, too." And lastly, he said this, "I can't play with a hatchet over my head every season. For no reason at all, sometimes I become a passive player. The total vibes aren't there anymore." The next issue is the most interesting. He realized that he was too passive. He understood that he was more of a follower than someone who would lead by force. If he wasn't specifically told to have a more scorers mentality, then he wouldn't be aggressive. On one side, he was trying to put the team first and win games. That was always his priority. But on the other side, there seems to be a mental aspect to this that didn't allow him to take over when needed. Should this be considered a weakness in his game? Was he too unselfish for his own good? You'll hear different answers depending on how you view the game. What we do know is that he made the adjustments necessary at the turn of the decade. He was much more aggressive, and the Sixers benefited tremendously. He was able to win the MVP in 1981, and he later won an NBA championship in 1983. The doctor was finally back.
MVPs regular season. LeBron James 4. Kobe Bryant 1.
He got 2, I got 1, Kobe got 1, something wrong with that picture.
Steve Nash was hit statistically at the numbers, but Kobe was 2.
Kobe, you only won 1 MVP award.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because the media votes on it. But that being said, does it bother me? Yeah, it bothers me. Of course it bothers me.
But the other guy you mentioned, the idea that Kobe Bryant even gets to be in this discussion is laughable.
Kobe Bryant's career resume is nearly flawless. However, there's one blemish that causes many people to believe that he shouldn't be allowed in the GOAT conversation, and it's the fact that he's only won 1 MVP award, that he was only the best player in the world for maybe 1 year. But winning the MVP doesn't necessarily mean that you're the best player in the league that season. There's a certain criteria that you have to meet in order to be eligible for the most prestigious individual award in basketball. There's also a narrative that Major League voters take into consideration. There are many players who benefited greatly from that criteria, but no one was a bigger victim than Kobe Bryant. But first, what is exactly this criteria or narrative for the MVP? The answer is in the name itself. What kind of value do you bring to the team? One of the biggest factors that league voters look at is the team record. You have to win a certain number of games in order to be seriously considered for this award. Did you know that 88% of the MVP winners since 1960 came from teams that won over 50 games? If you're not one of the top teams in the league, you have to be doing something historic if you want a chance at winning the MVP. This is something that league voters have been less strict about in the past few years, but during Kobe's era, it was almost an unwritten rule that you had to win at least 50 games. From 1990 to 2016, all 27 MVP winners came from teams that won over 50 games. With that mentality, the league voters were never going to take seriously what Kobe was accomplishing during his best individual years. In 2006 and 2007, he was surrounded by very little talent. It was going to be extremely tough for him to get the team success needed to sway the voters. That's especially the case when he was playing in a much tougher conference. The San Antonio Spurs, Dallas Mavericks, and Phoenix Suns each won over 60 games during those 2 years. Imagine having to play those teams with that roster 12 times a year. For Kobe to drag the Lakers to the playoffs was extremely impressive. Without him, they would easily be one of the worst teams in the league. You can make the case that no one was bringing more value to their teams than Kobe was. However, the league voters were disregarding the context surrounding each team. The talent and depth of the Lakers simply couldn't compare to what the Phoenix Suns and Dallas Mavericks had. To make matters worse, the 2007 Lakers experienced a lot of injuries to their already depleted roster. Their second best player, Lamar Odom, missed 26 games. Kwame Brown missed half of the season. Luke Walton missed 22 games. 3 other starters missed a large chunk of games, which made the Lakers an even bigger one-man show. But that didn't stop Kobe from breaking one record after another. For those 2 seasons, he had one 80-point game, 3 60-point games, 12 50-point games, and 29 40-point games. He was beating teams by himself during a time when defense was more prevalent. There's no question that he was the best individual player in the league. He could have been the exception to the rule as other players had, but he lost the MVP to players whose numbers weren't even close to Kobe's. All that mattered in the end was the wins. But even when you meet these criteria, there are other factors that they look at. For instance, what kind of talent you're surrounded with. If you're playing alongside an all-time great player, then you're almost disqualified from winning this award. When your team wins a lot of games, the media will say, well, what did you expect? He was playing with such and such. That's what the media was doing to both Shaq and Kobe after winning their first title. I wouldn't argue against anyone who says that Shaq was the best player for the Lakers in 2001 and 2002. I believe that is factual. But in 2003, there was a change. Shaq was not present for the first part of the season because he wanted to recover from an injury on company time. Let's not forget that many of their most important role players were old and tired from the last 3 title runs. But Kobe put the team on his back. This was a year where he averaged over 40 points per game for a calendar month and was the first to do so since Wilt Chamberlain. He even scored 40 points in 9 straight games. He averaged more points than Shaq that season. But the context of that year didn't matter. There was a certain mentality that the media had towards him. This is what he said to the court with A-Rod and Big Cat.
But I got to a point in my career where it was the rumblings, and some of it created by him, that, you know, Kobe can't win without me. And it was like, hold up. No, it's not true.
Right.
It's not true.
Right.
And I'm not going to retire and have people hold that over my head.
Shaq and the media claimed that Kobe couldn't win without him. As great as his numbers were, as impressive as all the never-before-seen moves that he was doing, he could only go so far without the big fella. How could he be the most valuable player in the league if he wasn't even the most valuable player on his team? This narrative was going to prevent him from ever being considered the MVP. And people wonder why he wanted to play without Shaq. It's because he wanted to prove that this stigma was completely false. In the following years, he proved emphatically that he was the best player in the world, and it was a title that he held for the rest of that decade. The unfortunate thing is that there isn't anything that the league offers that awards that. Without the MVPs, there isn't anything that we can point to that proves that no one was better individually than Kobe. But we do have the testimonials from players and coaches who was there to witness what he was doing. Take what Mike D'Antoni said during the 2006 season when everyone was debating if the MVP should go to his star player, Steve Nash, or Kobe. Quote, "I'm not saying that he's the most valuable player, but he's certainly the best player, and is not even close. He is utterly dominant." End of quote. If the coach of the MVP is saying that, then what more can be said? No one was questioning his individual greatness. It was obvious that he was on another level. In that same Sports Illustrated article, Clippers coach Mike Dunleavy was even saying that Kobe was better than Michael Jordan ever was from a talent standpoint. But everyone knew what the criteria was, and his team situation wasn't going to allow him to win the MVP. Then LeBron James broke into the scene, and the supposed debate was about who was the best player in the world. It was an entertaining debate, but there was no question who ran the league. Take Grant Hill, who made this interesting observation to Sports Illustrated back in 2010. Quote, "LeBron has a pull-up jumper and he takes it to the rim. He has 2 pitches, and trust me, both of them are great. But Kobe is like the guy with all the pitches. He brings the fastball, his changeup, and he gives you something on the corner. LeBron will overpower you, but you might know what's coming. With Kobe, you're never comfortable." End of quote. Players and coaches alike knew the answer to this question. The debate was more for media talking heads. It's no secret that the media always had a love-hate relationship with Kobe. But there were some honest sports writers who viewed things the same way the players and coaches did. That includes the writer Jack McCallum. Check out what he wrote in 2010 while Kobe was going for his 5th title. Quote, "Let me propose another simple but often overlooked reason that Kobe remains superior to LeBron. Kobe's a better basketball player, not a better athlete, which sometimes gets lost. A better basketball player. He dribbles better, passes better, he has more ways to score, and understands the game better. That is not to say that LeBron is inferior in any of those areas. He is great, but he's not as good as Bryant." End of quote. While LeBron was failing to reach the finals, Kobe was winning back-to-back titles. His skill, numbers, and team success were all that we needed to reach the logical conclusion that Kobe Bryant was easily the best player in the world. At the very least, this was a title that he owned from 2006 to 2010. That's a 5-year stretch, which is more than any other player in that decade. He owned the 2000s, not Shaq, not Duncan, and not LeBron. If you want to add more seasons to that list, then I don't blame you one bit. It wasn't the right way, but it was the smart way. Charles Barkley was ready to contend for a title, and he knew he wasn't going to accomplish this with the Philadelphia 76ers. It was time for a change. So did he go out there in his final season with the Sixers and underperform just to prove a point? Did he cause distractions on the team to force his way out of Philly? Was this all part of a plan of an evil genius? After reviewing the numbers and context of the 1991-92 season, you have more than enough information to determine if he truly quit on his team. First, let's review briefly Barkley's tenure with the Sixers before the start of the season in question. For the first 2 years of his career, he couldn't ask for a better situation. He was sharing the floor with Maurice Cheeks, Andrew Toney, Moses Malone, and the great Dr. Julius Erving. This was the same core that won a title in '83. But he quickly realized that the championship window closed before Barkley could make any kind of impact. After his 3rd season, Dr. J retired, Moses was traded to the Washington Bullets, and Andrew Toney's career was destroyed due to a series of injuries. Now the Sixers were in rebuild mode. After a few years of heavily relying on Charles to carry the team, they were able to build a formidable squad around him by the time the 1989-90 season began. They won 53 games and they reached the semifinals for 2 consecutive years. In my opinion, the Sixers had the luxury of having the 3rd best player in the league behind Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson. In theory, they should have been the team to rival the Chicago Bulls out in the East. But the relationship between him and the front office had reached its breaking point. Team executives were tired of all the controversies that Barkley found himself in. For example, in the 1990-91 season, he said to reporters after a loss to the New Jersey Nets, "This is a game that if you lose, you go home and beat your wife and kids." For some reason, playing against the Nets just brought out the worst in him. Late in the season, against the Nets once again, he had the infamous incident where he spat on a fan and it landed on a little girl. Imagine the world of trouble he would have found himself in if he did that today. Believe it or not, he only missed 1 game for those 2 incidents. Now if you're winning and your best player is acting out like that, then there's a reason to put up with it. But once they started losing, the Sixers wasted no time putting this once-in-a-generation player on the trade block. There was a lot of talk that he was going to be sent to the Clippers for 3 players and 2 draft picks. He was also incredibly close to being traded to the Lakers. At this point, the Sixers knew that he wanted to play for another team, so they wanted to get rid of him as quickly as possible. You can only imagine how hearing his name constantly in trade rumors was affecting his mood on and off the court. But before we get to that, there's one question we need to answer. Why was Barkley so desperate to leave? For starters, he was unhappy with the team's inability to build a title-contending roster around him and the way they handled their business. For example, he told Rick Riley of Sports Illustrated back in '92 that he didn't like the way they treated Rick Mahorn during the off-season. When they released him, they apparently broke the news through a voicemail. He was upset that they didn't have the guts to tell him face to face. To make matters worse, they replaced him with Charles Shackelford. No disrespect, but if that guy's your starting center, then your team has some problems. He also told Sports Illustrated that he didn't like how Mo Cheeks found out that he was getting traded while answering questions to the media, and that they tried to trade Dr. J to the Utah Jazz at the end of his career because they didn't want to pay him. So what happened to Rick Mahorn must have been the final straw. There was no way that this team was going to be able to contend for a title as constructed, and he was getting impatient. Who could blame him? He was 28 years old at the time, and all he wanted was to win a title. It was clear that he wasn't going to accomplish this with the Sixers. His frustration was understandable. However, the way he expressed his frustration to the owner and his teammates is what burned his bridge with the organization. For example, he called the team's general manager a clown whose only ambition is to caddy for the Philadelphia owner. That was according to the New York Times. Then we have what he said early in the season. According to the Washington Post, he said it wouldn't surprise him if they kept David Hoppin, a white player, instead of fielding an all-black team. But what about his teammates? According to the Los Angeles Times, he was quoted as saying that his teammates are lazy. In addition, he said this, quote, "In the past, I would get on guys' rear ends and ride them like horses, but I quit doing that because all the guys complained. We can't worry about feelings when you're below 500, end of quote. As you would have imagined, that didn't sit too well with his troops. According to the Chicago Tribune, on that very same day, some of his teammates fired back, saying that Barkley can be a selfish player who consciously disrupts the offense. It was clear at that moment that the chemistry of this team was shot. It's no surprise that the Sixers finished the season with a 35-47 record and they missed the playoffs. Now what about the performance of Charles Barkley? Check out the numbers that he recorded. He averaged 23.1 points, 11.1 rebounds, and 4.1 assists. Now let's compare to what he recorded in the prior year. He averaged 27.6 points, 10.1 rebounds, and 4.2 assists. His points per game average dropped by 4.5 points. It's already been established that this team was deficient in scores, even more so than the previous year. But yet, he averaged 2.4 fewer shot attempts? Was he less aggressive because he wanted to prove a point to his teammates, the owner, and the fans of Philadelphia? In my opinion, I think it has something to do with it. The reason why I say this is because of what Johnny Dawkins, his teammate, said to the Washington Post that season. Here's an excerpt from a 1992 article. Quote, "Teammates have noticed a change in Barkley this season. It's a very opinionated city," says guard Johnny Dawkins. "Charles takes most of the heat when we lose. I think undeservedly so. It comes with the territory and his situation. I don't know if he was prepared to deal with that because he had never really lost here the way we were losing at times this season. He doesn't mean to lash out at anyone because Charles is generally one of the nicer guys in the league, especially one of the nicer all-star players in the league. But maybe it's the pressure of so many people pointing the finger at him and not at us." End of quote. Barkley has admitted since then that it bothered him when the media or fans would criticize his game. He also mentioned in that same article from the Washington Post that he wanted the team to acknowledge that he wasn't the reason why they were losing. He wanted them to show appreciation for his hard work. He said that they never mentioned that to him. This could have been his way of proving to everyone that he wasn't the reason why his team missed the playoffs, that he was the only reason why they were relevant from the moment Dr. J and Moses Malone were gone. Despite their losing record, the owners of the Sixers still weren't convinced, so they traded him away in the offseason to the Phoenix Suns. If that wasn't enough, they even told reporters that acquiring 3 quality players from Phoenix would make them a better team. So in the following season, the Sixers won 26 games, while the Suns won 62 games while reaching the finals. In the end, Barkley had the last laugh.
Touches it, it begins, 3 seconds, Hondo off the gun, and he's got it with a second! Not until it's touched, they'll have to throw it up, Garhard, turn around, shot in the air, it's good! It's tied again! I don't believe so! Fight with Richie Powers! Richie Powers is in a fight with a fan!
You know the story. You know the game very well. It's Game 5 of the 1976 Finals between the Boston Celtics and the Phoenix Suns. The moment in question went as follows. John Havlicek hits what seemed to be a buzzer-beating shot. The refs added a second to the game clock. The Suns call a timeout they didn't have. JoJo White hits a free throw. Then Gar Heard made the shot heard round the world that forced a third overtime. That's the side of the story that the NBA has told you. What they conveniently took out was the chaos that ensued. Today, that side of the story will get the deep dive it deserves, and you'll see that the NBA's greatest game was also its biggest black mark. Let's start by setting the stage. For the Boston Celtics, there was a sense of finality for this group. They were led by John Havlicek, who started his career in the 1962-63 season. He won 6 championships with Bill Russell in the 60s. He helped bridge the next era for this team in the following decade, and he continued what Russell started. Along with Dave Cowens and JoJo White, they won a title in 1974. But now, Havlicek was 35 years old. This team didn't seem as invincible as the previous seasons. This was the end of an era. This was their final shot to relive the glory days and for Hondo to come out on top as Bill Russell would always do. A lot was riding on this game. It just wouldn't seem right if he experienced his first defeat in the finals against this team. The Phoenix Suns won only 42 games that season. They got hot at the right time, and their balanced scoring attack gave Boston real problems. If they lose this game, they'll be on the wrong side of history. Everyone felt the gravity of this moment at the Boston Garden. When you combine that with another element, then you are mixing the perfect recipe for disaster. The game started at 9 o'clock. Remember, during this time, the games were on tape delay. They were not televised live. So these games would start at odd times to please networks such as CBS, who would eventually televise the game. Why is this an important detail? Check out what author Bill Simmons, who was at the game, wrote in the book of basketball, about that day. Quote, "Do you know what happens when you start that late for a crowd of loony Boston fans during a time when anyone could afford a ticket to the NBA Finals? You end up with the rowdiest, craziest, drunken Boston crowd of all time. With 4 full hours to get plastered before the game, and another 3 during the game itself. Not only will the collective blood alcohol level of the crowd never be topped, neither will the game." End of quote. Now we'll get to the moment at hand, which is right after John Havlicek makes a running jumper as time expires, and the referees correctly decide to add another second to the game clock. We're going to look at 3 different things. We're going to look at what CBS was able to document, what the players recounted from the game years later, and what some of the national sports writers witnessed and published in the following days. Since there weren't hundreds of cameras capturing every angle of the game, it was easy to miss everything that was going on the court. To start, here's what everyone was watching sometime in the early morning on their television sets.
Phoenix Suns will get the ball with 2 seconds to go. This game is not over. Richie Powers is in a fight with a fan right here in front. Referee Richie Powers was assaulted by a fan. They pulled the boar off. There are the cops out in the middle. They got fans out in the middle of the floor. The Phoenix Suns trying to get it cleared to get the 2 seconds off. Here's Richie Powers now.
A lot was going on during that moment. One thing that you all noticed was the referee being attacked by some fans. This is what caught the eyes of Dave Cowens and the Celtics head coach, Tom Heinsohn. Check out what they said decades later when discussing this unforgettable moment.
What the guard heard, and I think that's how it went. But in between there, it's like some fan came out and punched Richie Powers, one of the referees. Dennis Autry goes over and starts punching that guy, and there's like 100 or more people out on the floor, and the game's not even over. So that was a weird kind of a thing, just a sidebar to that game.
We're called back on the floor. I mean, it was pandemonium, and once the crowd found out that they had there was 1 second left on the clock, they went after Richie Powers, the official, and the police actually had to escort people off the floor so we could resume the game and Richie Powers stay alive.
Saving the life of referee Richie Powers? Was it that serious? Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of a fan fighting with a referee, but that's exactly what happened here. Check out what he said in an interview that was recorded on referee.com. Quote, "I was standing at mid-court with the ball between my legs when I saw this guy out of the corner of my eye coming right at me. He hit me in the chest and I missed him with 2 punches. Then we fell over and I landed on top of him. When we got up, I remember a couple of Suns whacked the guy pretty good before security took him away." End of quote. That was an incident that was caught on camera, so everyone seems to point to that more than anything. But that wasn't the only incident that occurred. According to the New York Times, fans in the upper balconies were throwing cups, waste paper, and rubber balls onto the court. Then we have what Sports Illustrated reported. They wrote that a courtside table was picked up and hurled into the air. The basketball support was almost toppled over, and Phoenix Sun players Ricky Sobers and Dennis Autry were ready to rumble. Wait, the Suns players were fighting the fans too? Remember, the Suns called a timeout after the referees added a second to the clock, and that's when all the craziness happened. They still needed to drop a play to try to extend the game. But the fans of Boston weren't done causing a mess of a scene. They were disturbing the Suns huddle while the coach was talking to his players. According to the New York Times, he mentioned that there is something wrong when you can't even coach in a huddle without fans fighting with your players the whole time. He even said, "I'm surprised nobody was seriously hurt." We have seen some crazy interactions between the fans and players, but this is one of the crazy ones that is not available for us to see. Despite all that craziness and distractions, the Suns still went out there and converted on one of the most memorable plays. They deserve all the credit for staying focused on the task at hand. You can't really prepare yourself to stay composed under those circumstances, but they did. I can truly understand why this has been dubbed the greatest game ever played. It was unlike anything we've ever seen. The NBA wants to conceal the ugly side of this game, but I believe it just adds to the legacy of that crazy night. I've got a label as a bad guy now, and I'm not a bad guy. I just want to play basketball. Things started out so good. Then, sometimes I'd say to myself, how can this be happening to me? Those were the words of Bob McAdoo after playing for his 4th team in 3 years. Everybody was asking the same question that he made to himself. What on earth happened to him? Even Los Angeles Times writer Jim Murray wrote this about this peculiar situation in 1981. Quote, "No one could understand it. The touch was still there. The points were still there. He didn't slug baby seals over the head with baseball bats in the off-season. He was a basketball player, one of the game's best ever, and he couldn't keep a job." End of quote. This still remains one of the game's greatest mysteries. But after doing a lot of digging, I was able to find an answer. Before we get to that, we first must understand just how great of a player he was. In the 1973-74 season, his 2nd year in the NBA, he helped lead the Buffalo Braves to their first winning season since forming in 1970. He was once considered too frail to play the center position. By the end of his sophomore season, he averaged 30.6 points on 55% shooting, 15.1 rebounds, and 3.3 blocks per game. He wasn't a physical force around the rim. Instead, he was one of the most elite outside shooters in the game. Nobody had ever seen this from a player his size. Bill Russell went as far as to call him the best shooter of all time. On defense, Walt Frazier gave him the ultimate compliment. He said that near the basket, he's almost a Bill Russell. In the following season, he took his game to new heights. He averaged the insane stat line of 34.5 points on 51% shooting, 14.1 rebounds, and 2.1 blocks per game. He recorded the 8th most total points for a single season ever. He was so dominant that he was awarded the MVP. Keep in mind that he was competing against Kareem, Rick Barry, and Elvin Hayes. He proved that he was already at their level. He continued his strong play the next season, helping the team win his first playoff series. He even recorded over 50 points and 20 rebounds during the playoff game in 1975. In those 3 years, he won an MVP. He finished runner-up in the other 2 seasons, and he won 3 straight scoring titles. He already accomplished so much, and he hadn't even turned 25 years old yet. He was only going to get better. In fact, Buffalo's coach Jack Ramsey mentioned to reporters that by the time Bob McAdoo is through, he'll be the greatest player in history. That was the impression that he left. Then, all of a sudden, they gave up on him. At the beginning of the 1976-77 season, the Braves traded away the MVP to the New York Knicks for John Giannelli and a reported $3 million. John was a player that averaged 7.8 points per game for his career. Why would they agree to such a lopsided trade? The reasoning behind this move was that McAdoo's contract was set to expire by the end of that season, and negotiations had hit a roadblock. They simply didn't want to risk losing him for nothing. The Knicks, on the other hand, were ecstatic to land the young superstar. They were desperately looking for a big man who could replace Willis Reed, who retired in 1974. They needed someone who could score and rebound. He was going to be able to fill that void perfectly. In 1977, he finished 5th in both scoring and rebounds. In 1978, he finished 3rd in scoring and 8th in rebounds. He was able to put up numbers even while playing with some great talent. He played alongside Hall of Famer Spencer Haywood and Earl Monroe. They had the pieces necessary to win, but they faced a disappointing end to their season. In the second round of the 1978 semifinals, they got swept by Dr. J and the Philadelphia 76ers. They lost by an average margin of 18.8 points. That's when things started to get ugly. Bob heard that some of his teammates were complaining about not having a big center. Then, he blamed certain players for their lack of intensity. Then others were complaining about rookie head coach Willis Reed, that he wasn't ready for such an assignment. There were a lot of finger pointing. What was their excuse for such an underwhelming season? They had one of the top producing scorers and rebounders in the league. He was paired with 2 other all-star caliber players. How could they only win 43 games and lose so badly in the playoffs? The spotlight was starting to be put on Bob McAdoo. For more insight, check out what Dave Anderson wrote for the New York Times in 1979. Quote, "For all his points, Bob McAdoo never understood that he was sabotaging the team with all his shots, and he had to go when the Knicks front office learned of his recent offhand remark. Mac told somebody, a Knick official says, that he was not going to play hard until the last year of his contract, which has 2 more seasons to go after this one." End of quote. That made it easy for the Knicks to pull out this next move. In the middle of the 1978-79 season, they traded Bob to the Boston Celtics for Tom Barker and 3 first-round draft picks. The deal took place between the team owners without consulting the general managers or the coaches. That's how desperate they were to move on. After the news broke, this is what Knicks president Mike Burke said about the deal. Quote, "We have come to the conclusion that stars are less important. We have decided to build a winner with a group of players. We will try to have a balanced squad that will play as a team rather than as individuals. We have now put ourselves in a position to rebuild the team." End of quote. This was one of the first insights into what the major problem was surrounding this ultra-talented player, is that he seemed to care more about his stats than playing as a team. That kind of mentality from a star player stops any team from reaching its potential. It was an ugly end to his tenure in the Big Apple, but that was nothing compared to what happened in Boston. This was a team and a city that he did not want to play for. He even told the Cooper Showtime podcast that he didn't want to go to Boston because he was hated in Boston, and he felt the same way about that city. Then there was a controversy surrounding him and Dave Cowens. He was a player coach at the time, and he decided not to start him for multiple games. The idea was to work him slowly into the offensive system, but that's not how he took it. This is what he told the reporters during that offseason. Quote, "I don't want to be in Boston because of Dave Cowens. He sat me down because he didn't like the idea of me being there last season. The team didn't have enough talent to keep me sitting." End of quote. The team's executive, Red Auerbach, didn't hold anything back when asked about the deal. This is what he said, according to the New York Times. Quote, "I was violently opposed to the trade. As great of a scorer as he is not a great defensive player, and you don't build with one player. Dave tried to teach him our system, the Celtic way, but he was not interested in learning. He was only interested in his average and playing minutes." End of quote. This was an arrangement that was doomed to fail. He only played 20 games with the organization, and he was traded to the Detroit Pistons. He expressed his excitement to play alongside the legendary big man, Bob Lanier. Now, he could play his natural position, the power forward. On paper, it made sense. But as the season progressed, they kept losing and losing. After 37 games, they had a 9-28 record, which was the worst in the league. That's when the Pistons decided to end the Bob Lanier era, and they traded him away to the Milwaukee Bucks. That move symbolized that they were giving up on the season. It was time to start rebuilding. Bob McAdoo is known for being ultra competitive, and he wants to win more than anything. He wasn't happy with the way the season was turning out, but he reached his breaking point in a game against his former team, the New York Knicks. He played only 15 minutes in the first half, and he was benched for the rest of the game. It was reported that he had an ugly outburst with his coach, Richie Adubato. In the following game, against another former team, the Celtics, he was sat out completely. This was the message that the coach said to reporters: "If he's an unhappy player, we're not going to play him." They were serious about this, and he came off the bench for the next 5 games. They later inserted him back into the starting lineup, but he only lasted 3 games. He was added to the injury reserve list and missed the rest of the year. He continued battling with injuries in the following season. He only played 6 games with the Pistons, but at one point, he felt ready to come back to the court. But the front office had a harsh message to him. The general manager told him that they didn't want to play him the rest of the year, and they wanted to continue giving the young players time to develop. Since he wasn't following their rules of being present at games, they essentially told him that they were done with him. He was waived by the team. A few days later, the New Jersey Nets decided to pick him up. Bob was anxious to prove that he was still one of the best players in the league, but each time he rushed back, he re-injured himself. Fans were getting so impatient that it was reported that he was booed unmercifully. He only played 10 games for the New Jersey Nets. At the end of the season, he was a free agent. He intended to not play for the Nets. However, they retained the rights to him because he did not give them an offer sheet under the league's new right of first refusal policy. So he sat out the first 25 games of the season as they waited for any potential deals. The question was, will there be any takers? For a while, the phone wasn't ringing. Teams were hesitant to give him a chance. For example, this is what John Steinmiller, the vice president of the Bucks, said about him. Quote, "McAdoo is a risk. So many bad things have happened to him. You have to wonder how much is his own doing." End of quote. The player that some people once believed would be the greatest ever couldn't find a home. It seemed to be a heartbreaking end to what was considered a promising career. But then, the Los Angeles Lakers picked up the phone. They were willing to roll the dice. As it turned out, they needed a power forward, with Mitch Kupchak going down with an injury. The Lakers were also looking for something to spark this team. They had their own problems that they were dealing with. Magic Johnson and their head coach, Paul Westhead, had an ugly exchange earlier in the year. He was even talking about leaving the team. That led to the Lakers parting ways with Paul. Pat Riley eventually took over full-time as a coach. It was an up and down season for this team. But once the playoffs rolled around, they couldn't stop winning. They became the first team to ever sweep their way to the finals. The secret to their success was Bob McAdoo. Take, for example, the conference finals series against the San Antonio Spurs. While coming off the bench, he averaged 20 points on 58% shooting, 7.3 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks per game. He was their third leading scorer. There was no other team that had that kind of weapon leading their second unit. He gave this team a whole new dynamic, and no one could stop them. The Lakers eventually won the title, beating the Sixers in 6 games. And just like that, Bob McAdoo was considered a winner. By the time his career was over, he had won 2 titles and reached the finals in 4 consecutive years. Bob McAdoo was surely humbled after going through all those experiences with those teams. Like any other former MVP, they feel like they can continue playing at that level for a very long time. When asked to come off the bench, they rarely take that kind of request the right way. He was no exception. But he changed his way of thinking. He not only accepted that role with the Lakers, but he fully embraced it. He learned that to win at the highest level, you need to make sacrifices for the team. He learned that the hard way, but it molded him into something much greater than winning any kind of individual award, and that's becoming a champion. Retirement tours are always reserved for the most legendary players. The most recent example of this was Kobe Bryant's final season. Once it was official that he was going to call it quits, he went stadium to stadium, received standing ovations, and an assortment of gifts from the opposing teams. It's our way of saying thanks to a truly special player. But there was one player where the league and the fans made it abundantly clear how they felt about him, and it wasn't pretty at all. That player was Elvin Hayes. Let's go back to the 1983-84 season. He made it known to the NBA world that he was going to play his final season, according to the New York Times. At that point, he was one of the most accomplished players in NBA history. Consider some of his notable achievements. By the time he played his final game, he was an all-time leader in games played, minutes, and field goal attempts. He was also third all-time in points and rebounds. On top of all of that, he was a champion. I understand that winning only one title doesn't seem like a big deal now, but during that time, he had the same number of titles as Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Bob Pettit, Rick Barry, and Dr. J. I can assure you they weren't counting rings as much as we do now. He was, and still is, one of the most legendary players. So as he went to stadium for the final time, you would think that the opposing teams and fans would pay the proper respect to this all-time great. That is where you are wrong. For example, here's what the Washington Post reported before his final game about the type of reception he was receiving. Quote, "He got a plaque in Philadelphia, a clock in Seattle, a proclamation in Houston, and polite applause elsewhere. No cars, no boats, no television sets, and no tears. just goodbye. In San Antonio last week, Hayes didn't even leave the bench when he was introduced there for the last time. He gritted his teeth, nodded, and flicked his hand in a weak salute. So much for the farewell tour of Elvin Hayes. End of quote. No cars, no boats. Did he really think that teams would show him that kind of love? The writer was likely thinking of the retirement tour that John Havlicek had in 1978. According to Sports Illustrated, the teams of the league were essentially kissing the feet of this highly respected legend. The reasons for that weren't just for his extensive resume, it was also his reputation. You couldn't find a single opposing player or fan saying anything negative about him. Even Jerry West, the player who lost so many times to him in the finals, went as far as to say that he was the ambassador of our sport. It's no wonder that he was showered with gifts and love in every stadium he went to. But Elvin Hayes was a different story. Why wasn't he getting that same kind of love? I believe Ray Patterson, the president and general manager of the Rockets, said it best when describing the reason behind the dull reaction he was getting. He said, Elvin has to realize that he's reaching the stage of his career where a lot of subterranean feelings towards him are gonna come to the surface. What kind of feeling was he referring to? Well, he started by saying this: I think if you took a poll of coaches and players about Elvin, they say he's the toughest guy in the world to deal with. Okay, a superstar player being hard to deal with is nothing new in this NBA world. But I'm telling you, Elvin Hayes wasn't just controversial or polarizing. He was hated by virtually everyone. That includes his teammates and especially his coaches. The following quotes that I'll be referencing are all from the Washington Post. Since the writers from this newspaper saw him play more than anyone else, it was only right to go to them. To start, here's what they wrote in 1983. Few athletes in any sport elicit such emotional reaction from current and former teammates as Hayes. If you want proof, let's go through all the testimonies that they received throughout the years. Alex Hannum, his coach while he was playing with the San Diego Rockets, described him as the most despicable person I've ever met in sports. His coach while playing with the Houston Rockets, Dale Harris, remembers having screaming matches and being called out publicly for removing him from the starting lineup. His running mate, Wes Unseld, who never badmouthed anyone, let alone a teammate, said this about Elvin: there were times where I wanted to strangle Elvin or break his back. Those thoughts definitely crossed my mind. Even the trainer of the Bullets told the Washington Post that being around him was like Chinese water torture. This was the reputation that he had around the league. As bad as all of this sounds, this doesn't mean that he was a bad person. It's quite the opposite. He also had the reputation of being an extremely charitable person and affectionate with children. He lived a clean life outside of basketball. It makes so much sense that the Big E was referred to as the Big Enigma. He was basically two different people, as Dale Harris described him. There was the man outside the locker room and the man inside the locker room. Within those walls, he was harsh with everyone, including himself. In his final season, he admitted that he didn't always conduct himself the right way. He told the Washington Post, "I've done some things I wish I hadn't, and I guess I can see why some people would say I was hard to get along with. It's just I expected so much from myself that I expected the same out of my teammates." His self-reflection was commendable, but it was too little, too late. In this industry, it's all about how you're viewed by your peers. If you don't have their respect, the rest will follow suit. As David Rebnick wrote during his retirement tour, quote, "Coaches, players, and reporters alike were frustrated by his antics and statements. Many could not stand him. Many still can't." End of quote. In his final season, it was clear that the fans could be added to that list, except the fans in Washington. He is adored in that city, and rightfully so. In his final game there, he received a standing ovation when he was introduced as a starter. Unfortunately, that was the only storybook ending that he got. What about you all? How do you remember Elvin Hayes' retirement tour? Do you think he was misunderstood, or was all the hate warranted? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.